Hi, my name's Al and today I'm going to show you how to set up your rear mech to get your rear gears shifting properly. It's a common problem but one that can be easily solved. First of all, we need to make sure that our rear mech is mounted properly. If you've got a Shadow or Shadow Plus mech, you need to make sure that this little noggin here, sometimes it's a pin, is butted up properly against this tab on your rear mech hanger. You can check it by loosening the mech's mounting bolt and physically holding it against the tab as you tighten it back up. That's essential for it to work properly. Make sure that your wheel is properly installed. This is a bolt through wheel, so you're not really going to have too many issues, but ensure it's properly in the dropouts, especially true of a quick release wheel. Make sure it's properly in there, because if it's a bit skew-if, then your gears aren't going to work properly. It's also really important that the rear mech hanger is all in line with the cassette, so when you view it from behind, make sure it's all in line. If it's not, if anything's bent, then the gears are probably never going to work properly at all. If you've dropped the bike recently, or you've mashed it putting it in the back of the car, then there's a good chance that you could have bent something, so you'll need to check that. If it's slightly misaligned, then you can have the hanger straightened. As long as it's not cracked or anything, then a decent bike shop will be able to straighten that hanger for you. It'll only cost you a few quid. If it's an emergency situation and you're at the trail centre and you want to ride, then you might be able to get away with bending the hanger straight with an adjustable spanner, or possibly even by just grabbing the mech. Might not work, but it might. What you got to lose, eh? If you've really knackered it, you'll need to get yourself a new mech hanger. These cost from about 10 quid upwards. Other points to consider are lubrication. So make sure you lube your mech with some decent chain oil. This is one area of the bike where I would recommend a good thick traditional wet lube, something that's going to stick around for a decent amount of time. Old mechs are particularly prone to seizing around the top pivot, and always remember to lube your jockey wheels as well, because they're quite prone to seizing also. Make sure that your chain isn't totally worn. If everything's completely worn out, your gears are never going to work properly. Having said that, even a tired old rear mech and shifters can be brought back to life with a new cable. The main parts to consider: the inner cable and the last part of outer cable which runs to the rear mech. Now that everything is clean, in line, lubed, all ready to go, we can get on with the adjustment. In order to work out how to adjust your mech, I think it's important to know how it works. There's three main adjustments that we can do. One is the cable tension, two are the limit screws, and three is the B tension. We'll move on to the B tension later, but we'll start with the limit screws right now. Now, to set the limit screws, first of all, we're going to undo the cable clamp here. So, cable's not involved, it's not doing anything. It's important to separate the limit screws and the adjustment of those from that of the cable tension. The limit screws control the range of the mech, so how far it can move across the cassette. It allows you to access all the gears without the chain ever overriding and landing on the frame or going into the back wheel. We'll start with a high adjustment. So this here is the high screw, and we need to screw it in so that the jockey wheel is in line with top gear, which is the smallest sprocket. We can check its function by seeing whether or not the chain will shift smoothly onto that sprocket. If it struggles or it's noisy, like it is now, we need to back it off. As we've undone it, the mech's been able to move slightly further over, which has allowed it all to be perfectly in line. So now the mech shifts using just its spring down onto the high sprocket, the smallest one. We also need to check that we can't pull the mech over, so by hand give it a little tug. If that stop isn't wound in far enough, then the mech will be able to move all the way off the end of the cassette, and the chain will derail off the cassette and jam against the frame. So obviously we don't want that to happen. So we need to get it set perfectly, as we have done there. That's not coming off. Next up, we're going to do the low adjustment, which is marked with an L usually. You can see we've currently got this set where the chain will override over the end of the cassette. So we obviously don't want that to happen. We need to screw the low limit adjuster in so we can shift up onto that sprocket without it overriding into the spokes. So now we can see the cable isn't doing anything at all, and the mech's got full range of the cassette without it overriding the block at any point. So that's our limit screws set. They never need to be touched again unless you manage to bend something. Any adjustments made to your gears in the future can all be done through cable tension, which we're going to sort out now. Before we set our cable tension, we need to make sure that the shifter is in top gear, which it is, and that the barrel adjuster is screwed in sufficiently. I'd wind it all the way in and then back it out a turn or two. That'll give us a bit of something to play with. Okay, so to set the cable tension, first we'll need to clamp the cable. Make sure it's routed correctly. Pull it tight, as tight as you can with your hand. And then nip up the bolt. This tag end on a Shadow or a Shadow Plus mech, just make sure that's out of the way, because it can ting on the spokes, otherwise it can be rather distracting. With the cable clamped, we need to do some fine tuning. We shift up one gear, the chain should move one gear. What we need to do is make sure that this top guide pulley or jockey wheel is dead in line with the sprocket that the chain's supposed to be sitting on, so the second smallest sprocket. You can fine tune that with the barrel adjuster, either at the mech or on the shifter. When it's lined up, you should find that each click of the shifter will correspond to one shift. That seems to be spot on. You might need to do some fine tuning. So if it struggles to go into an easier gear like that, then add some tension onto the cable and it will make it easier. If it struggles to drop down to the smaller sprockets, so the higher gears, then back off the tension. Eventually, as long as everything's straight and not worn out, not seized, then you should achieve the operation that you're looking for. So for the final adjustment, it's the B tension. This is something which is often neglected. It's important with every mech, but it's really important with a Shadow or a Shadow Plus. Without this adjustment being done correctly, your gears aren't going to work properly. So the adjuster is this screw here, that's your B tension screw, and what it does is it alters the distance between the top jockey wheel and the sprockets. It allows it to follow the block closely and allows the shift to be as smooth as it can be. In order to make this adjustment, we want to be in the biggest sprocket at the back, so easiest gear. And we've done most of our adjustments in the middle ring here, well, all of our adjustments on the rear mech, but for this we need to drop into the smallest chain ring at the front, so the granny ring. On a standard rear mech, we would need to adjust the B tension so that the top jockey wheel runs as close as possible to this large sprocket without it actually touching. You'll hear when it touches because it will make a grinding noise. The closer it is, the better the shift. With a Shadow Plus or a Shadow mech, then there needs to be a 5 to 6 mil gap between the teeth of the jockey wheel and the teeth of that largest sprocket. If you need to move the jockey wheel further away, you need to screw the screw inwards, so clockwise. If you pull the mech backwards, that will relieve some of the tension on the screw and you'll be able to turn it in. If you need to move it closer in, then back it off. As you see, that will move the mech closer. You can use a ruler, but it's pretty tricky to get one in there. As long as you're happy, you've got a 5 to 6 mil gap, the gears should work nicely. Once you've made all your adjustments, just have one final go through the gears, make sure it does everything that it should do. Check those limit screws. Make sure there's no way that that chain can come off and cause an expensive accident. Okay, so that's your lot. Hopefully your gears are working sweet now. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. See ya.